brought my quilt over to my ironing board, and I just wanted to show you. I was showing you basically similar was I was doing on one of my other quilts, my big flower panel with all of the quilting on it. How I actually will address this quilt. That one had tons and tons of my Big Dream quilt panel. That had tons and tons of stitching, so it was shrinking the fabric terribly. Well, I wanted it to shrink it. As you know, I don't pre-wash my fabrics. And in the case of just some reds, my quilts shrink a little bit, but they're pretty good. They don't shrink an awfully lot because this is how I address my quilt. This quilt, what I'm addressing mostly right now is the waviness, the puckering in it. It's not laying flat at all. So what I do is I spray quite generously with water, just water. And I'll sort of rub that in, really get the quilt quite wet. In this act of doing this, the fibers are shrinking, as I was saying before. Now, what I do in a case like this, where there's a lot of puckering, it's not flat at all, I wet it, but in the sheer case of putting an iron on fabric, this is a hot, dry iron, it's going to flatten that area. It's going to flatten. Now, I do iron, as you know. I'm ironing this. It's sort of sizzling. It's nice and wet. And in that act, it's shrinking these fibers. Now, again, this is all sort of wobbly and bubbly and all over the place. But the act, as I say, the act of putting a hot iron on a piece of fabric, whatever's under that iron plate's going to flatten. All right? Now, you're going to say, well, it's going to flatten, or I'm saying it's going to flatten with tucks, or with puckers, or with folds, or with a bit of a lump. Well, that's okay. It's flat. Okay? Now that's so I'm making this quilt top, which is all over the place, bubbly and ruffly and wobbly, and I'm making it go flat. I'm forcing these fibers, however they're doing, with a tuck or a fold. It's going flat. Okay? Now, I'm going right out to the edge where I've appliqued it onto my white. As you can see, this isn't too bad an area. The quilt is quilting flat for now. I'm ironing, nice, hot, heavy, dry iron on a wet quilt top here. Now I can tell, maybe you can't tell on the camera watching this, but I can tell and I can feel my these cotton fibers shrinking a little bit. They're just sort of being eased into wherever it needs to be eased into. Now, that's flat. Does it have puckers? Does it have easing issues? Yeah, absolutely. Does it have a fold there? Absolutely. Because it was not straight. It was not flat, I should say. Well, it is flat by the sheer nature of me forcing the iron over the fibers, but you know, that's okay. When I go to pin baste this quilt, then I have something reasonably flat, a nice flat quilt top. Then in the quilting process, I'll just move this over here. That area is quite nice and flat. So I'll come over here, I'll come over here and straightening it as best I can. And again, you see these puffs. But I'm okay. Give it a nice spritz. The fact that I've flattened it. And then I can go over to my machine, and when I actually pin baste it, like that's quite lumpy there. You're thinking, well, you know, this whole quilting it out. Yeah. So I'm just going to do this whole quilt here. Now that's pretty bad, but that's okay. Let me just flatten that. Let me just flatten it. Wherever the fabric at this point, this juncture right here, I smooth it as much as possible. Where does it want to go? Just flatten it. It's a big folded mess there, but it's flat. So again, I'm going to take it. I'm going to be very careful with it. Let this dry out naturally and lovely. And then at least I have a flat quilt top. That's the whole purpose. When you're constructing, even as a beginner quilter, being very, very, very careful to create your blocks. When you are constructing it, your whole object is for your blocks to be flat. And that's why, if you've been following along with me, that's why I'm iron lady. I press, 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 iron, iron, spritz, spritz, spray, starch, size. I iron with an inch of my life, because it makes your quilt go easier. It makes your seams shrink into the fibers nicely, the thread, I should say. It makes your seams lay flat. It just is a lovely way to start your quilting. If you're a beginner and you're just getting used to quilting, let your iron be your friend, and have it set up. Get up after, like, not after every seam, but really, really, I can't emphasize the importance of that. Now again, this was quite wrinkly. This was quite puffy, I should say. There's a big wrinkle there in the middle. But when I'm going to pin baste that, but it's nice and flat. Nice and flat. There's a big wrinkle here, big fold. But when I go to pin baste that, when I go to quilt it, I can just sort of, stretch it and ease that bit into my quilting stitches. And then I might have to take a drastic tuck, a drastic fold. This pucker here, I'll have to tuck the pucker. And it'll all be good. So I'm going to finish ironing this. As I said, I spritz within an inch of its life. But there I have a fairly flat, albeit slightly tucked and puckered quilt top. But for the most part, it's a flat quilt top that then I can now come along and baste to my backing. I finished pressing my quilt top flat, and I've just come into my family room and I've just laid it out on my very large sectional coming across the room and trying to show you the size of this thing. Beginner's quilt, right? Whatever it was I thinking. I'm trying to move the camera slow. It's quite nice and flat. As you can see, my 4 borders there with the white. That I attached. I appliqued the scallops. I got quite a few comments like, why didn't you just cut the scallops off and make a square quilt? I didn't think of that. Oh, silly me. I could have just cut the edge. I just could have cut the borders off and made a square quilt and saved myself all this time. But I actually persevered and I appliqued to the best of my ability, the silly little blanket stitch, this quilt top. Really just sort of messing about on those scallops, trying to clean them up the best I could, because they were really a bit of a mess. But I'm really quite pleased. Now as I showed you, I just finished ironing it. Now there's quite a lot of spaces. There's one of them right there. A real fold. I have pressed or I've ironed folds or wrinkles into the quilt top to make it flat. But then I'll address that when I actually go to iron it. I mean, when I actually go to quilt it. But for now, it's quite flat. My borders actually turned out quite nice. I haven't actually measured it, but I mean, if it's square or rectangle or whatever with the borders on it, but it looks pretty good. So there's my Joseph's coat. It's gonna fit my king size bed. As somebody else had said, oh, I've said to before, I don't think one of our beds in our house has a quilt on it. I make quilts for other people. I make throw quilts. I have quilts all over the house to cuddle under, but none of our beds have quilts. I got a quilt at TJ Maxx. Isn't that so funny? On my bed, but this might go on my bed actually, at least at the foot of my bed. So there's the top edge here. So yeah, there is my Joseph's coat. Now I did find, oh, it's in the other room, but I'll show you. I did find a lovely fabric that I had, yardage. One of my favorite online quilt stores, equilter.com. They have a clearance section, and it's and you can get fabric for like $5 a yard, $6 a yard. Nice fabric. So I think I have enough. It's a pink. It matches the pink of this quilt, but it has sort of like I think it's like a design of chandeliers on it, sort of tan chandeliers. It's not ideal, but again, I was not going to go out and buy however many yards is there. Hopefully there's enough. It seems like a big lot, because what I'm getting at is if there's fabric on sale, I will buy 7 or 8 or 9 yards for backing, and I have that yardage, and I just went sort of shopping because I can always use it. So there's my quilt. Look how big it is. Oh my word, it's massive. It's huge. Now the trick is I have to go quilt this, sandwich it. I'll sandwich it probably. I have my table over here, my breakfast table. I'll probably go sandwich it on my table, and then I will baste and sandwich it on my table, and then I'll come back and I'll try to quilt it on my home sewing machine. This massive, it looks like about 110 inch wide quilt. See how I go. Or I might just, fold it up and put it away, like I say, for the next 10 years. Nah, I think I'll stick with it. That's one thing. I don't know. Look at this thing. I do everything big. Got big hair, got big hips, got a big family, and I make big quilts. There you go. I make big quilts, and I cannot lie. So there you go, my Joseph's coat. See how I get on with this. Thanks.